Hello, and welcome to the Freddie Mac Connect session, Preventing Defects Through a Total Quality Mindset. All lines are in listen-only mode. This presentation is being recorded and will be available following this session. If you have any technical issues, please use the Q&A box and someone will assist you. Lastly, using the handouts icon, you will find links to our speakers' bios and the presentation deck. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. Today we have with us Jody Eberhardt, Project Management Director in Single Family Seller Engagement, joined by Steve Glancy, Underwriting Director in Single Family Quality Control. Jody and Steve, I will pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Camden. Steve and I will take you all through 5 topics today, and we're really focusing on starting around a total quality mindset, and then we'll head into 4 different areas that are common defects that we see coming through. So variable and fluctuating income, self-employed income, rental income, and missing documents. And how we'll handle our conversation today is Steve will cover things from a QC perspective and things that he sees, and then I'll cover things that I see out with our seller engagement team. So with that, let's head over to talk about total quality mindset. Steve, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks, Jody. And thank you, everyone, again today for joining us today. The total quality mindset. So one of QC's jobs is to continually give feedback to our sellers, usually on defects that we see in ways that we think they can improve their quality. And what we decided was we like to practice what we preach. So we took that total quality mindset inside QC. And I just wanted to share some things that we did internally. One is training. We added a full-time trainer to our staff, along with additional training touch points throughout the entire loan review process, especially on some high-risk loans, and added some escalation points that we did on some higher, defects we see there higher frequency of. Income being one of those. Income is still our top defect. So in addition to training and escalation points, we actually added what we call an income form to help analyze the type of income that the borrower has, along with the calculation of the income. So that's one thing that we did for total quality. We also enhanced our internal process around capturing some of our minor defects. Another thing we did was letter quality. We knew that the letters we put out to you all needed to be as clear as possible. So we put 100% check of all the letters going out the door, and we check them for accuracy, clarity, consistency, and we give daily feedback to our staff. So this helps bring clarity to the letters you receive so you can respond appropriately, as well as making sure that we're sending you the right letters when we do see a defect on a loan, so that you can learn from them and you can take our feedback and you can implement it internally to help your staff get better quality loans. So in general, there's also an increased focus on an enhanced process around providing feedback to our policy teams. So we're going to take the top trending issues that we see in our QC and our remedy space, and we're going to feed them to policy. And I will say you all will see these results of these in all the bulletins that are being released. So that's what we see from the QC perspective. How about from your side, Jody?
Yeah, Steve, those are all just great examples. And I think what we hear from our sellers and all the changes that are going on is just the feedback has been really positive. And these same concepts actually really apply to our seller side as well. So we like to have conversations around really starting quality at the top and thinking about shifting gears from defect detection, where they're finding things at the end, to how do they prevent things at the very beginning and through really continuous improvement. We like to see sellers really think about a mindset of designating all the employees as quality detectives. So it's really everyone's responsible for quality. It's not just something that gets picked up at the end. And I'll shift and talk about a few things that sellers can do on their side. So I think you all give great examples, and some of those they can apply too. But one of the things is just really reducing variation in the process. So anything you can do to leverage process improvement methodologies, or even better yet, automating things through technology. We'll talk through some of those examples today. And as you go through and look at how your process looks today, really thinking about probing questions and digging a little deeper. So here's a few to think about. So looking at your errors and defects and thinking about how many of those are really caused by human issues versus system. And by system, I mean, could be systemic, like how the process works, or truly the technology. The next thing to look at is thinking about what methods you might be using to monitor and improve your system. So things that you're going to check for all the way through and monitor and control. And this is more than just like check the checker checklist, but really monitoring things through reporting and trying to catch defects sooner and earlier before they become a quality issue at the end. And, I will say that no matter how good a lender's quality system is, there will be some defects, right? So thinking about what's the root cause of the defect when it shows up, asking those probing questions of why, and trying to just peel the onion back to get to what caused it. And I guess the number one thing that I see in the whys is usually when we're looking through repurchase letters and working things through with our sellers is quite often what we see is that they really are the tough loans that were part of this whole defect process. So the last thing I'll say is just really being mindful about having the right skill level assigned with the complexity of the task or the loan, because that seems to be kind of our common theme as we look at things. So I'll close out with a great example from one of our sellers. It's a fairly large institution, and their CEO wants to personally sign off on every single repurchase letter, wants to see them, look at them, and wants a proposal back from their technology team to say, hey, what changes did you make technically so this doesn't happen again? And also from the operations team to say, what changes did they make? And so that really kind of brings it back to full circle to really start at the top and making that organizational commitment to continuously improve. I think that's it for that topic. Let me pass it back to you, Steve, and we can head for the next one.
Sure. And our next topic, again, variable and fluctuating income. I love how you talked about defect prevention versus defect detection, and you discussed skill level too. And I think this is a really important place to have the right skill level involved in assessing these loans, where we are seeing some of the biggest challenges here is variable and fluctuating income. These are more challenging loans. They require a more historical analysis. They may require additional documentation beyond your standard wage earner. And a lot of them are in the higher DTI buckets, in those 40, 45, 50% DTI range, especially with the rates where they're at now. So we're seeing more tougher, more challenging loans. So I really encourage you, when it comes to variable and fluctuating income, make sure you do have the right skill level. We implemented a second level audit for certain DTI bands to make sure that when we're accepting a loan with a certain DTI, that we have all of the information that we need and we've made the right decision, because those are the riskier loans. Those are the ones on the margin. Another place where skill level helps in your QC space on the back end, the more underwriting experience, and we had a seller come to us and tell us, hey, we implemented underwriters in our QC and remedy process, and we've seen it pay huge dividends. We're getting better feedback to the front line. We're able to respond to your letters more timely and more appropriately and give you all the stuff that you need. And they're really having a lot of success when they've implemented some of these things. And I'll tell you, we had a QC council session. We brought in some sellers, and that's where we listened. We heard the feedback, where you were struggling, where the challenges were. Some of it was within the remedy space, some of it within our guide, some of it was just generally industry related. Some was the processes that we go through. So we did listen. QC took action where we could. And again, I'm going to ask sellers that they join us in this quality improvement journey. We had our income form, we've had our additional training, we've had our second level escalations, and we encourage all of you to implement this as well. And when it comes to especially this type of income, we want to see your notes. We want to see your income assessment. We want to see, how did you determine first the type of income, fluctuating versus non-fluctuating? And then how did the calculations support that analysis? Our employment landscape is really changing. Higher interest rates, it's harder to qualify. It's really critical that we get this income part right. Some of the things we're seeing, borrowers new to their job, employment gaps, not working consistent hours each pay period, recently received a raise. All of these things require that more in-depth analysis. May have another skill. You may have a more experienced underwriter with a better skill set to take a second level look at those. So those are all the things that we're seeing. And what we're asking the sellers to do is, hey, help us out here. Show us your work. Show us what you've done. Show us how you were able to determine fluctuating versus non-fluctuating. Send us your income sheets and let us see what you've done. And I'll end with this before I turn it over to you, Jody, is one of the biggest things we do see right now loans are being presented as non-fluctuating borrowers, but they're actually fluctuating borrowers. There's some sort of pay stub that has a varying amount of hours on it between pay periods, and the guide defines that as fluctuating. And we're getting sort of stories created to say, hey, this is why it's non-fluctuating, and it doesn't always work. It doesn't always line up. If your hours vary between pay periods, by definition, that's fluctuating. That's a more historical analysis that may require more documentation. And at the end of the day, especially if it's at a 45, 48, 50% DTI, you may want a second person to take a look at that with a little more experience, just to make sure that you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's and met the guides. So I'll turn it over back to you. What are you seeing from the seller side?
Yeah, that's good, Steve. I'll talk a little bit on the tech side. So first of all, using technology to help, anything that you can do to pick a report from AIM for payroll income or direct deposit from asset reports. If that's in there and it comes through, we'll take care of those fluctuating income calculations for you, so you don't have to worry about it. So I think that's always a great place to start. Steve, you covered income worksheets really well. The one piece I'll add to that is that making sure that those worksheets also go in your stacking order. So when you send the files over to our QC department, that the show your work part is actually included in that imaged file that we see it. The next thing I'll talk a little bit about is don't ask for documents you don't need. So really just be mindful of reading that LPA feedback message first. And if you use AIM, let's not ask for additional documentation. Avoid conflicting documentation in the loan file in the first place. And just, be really careful about that. If it asks you for 1-year tax returns, just get 1-year tax returns. So just really pay attention to those feedback messages. And lastly, on that same topic, the feedback messages, they do tell you if you have rep and warranty relief, but it also lets you know when there's potential quality issues. So it'll message when it sees fluctuating or variable income, or when there's maybe some data quality issues with your payroll reports. So it's just super important to read those messages and pay attention, because they'll tell you where to go and where you might have a defect. I think that's it for variable and fluctuating income. Let's head over to the next topic, and Steve, I'll pass it back to you.
So another one of QC's favorite topics, and I'm going to piggyback off of something you just touched on too, with self-employed income. We always say in QC, reading is fundamental. You do want to really follow the LPA feedback messages. So if you were conditioned to get one-year tax return, that is the minimum assessment that is required in order to make that loan work. And we do encourage you, follow that assessment. That is the guidelines that we said we will accept the loan under. If you do provide additional tax returns, or I will say what we're seeing now is tax comparison worksheets. So tax software is including additional years income history. That must be addressed. It must be looked at. You can't just ignore it because the LPA feedback said get 1 year. If you get 2 or 3 years worth of income documentation, we have to at least take a look at it. And you have to decide, do I have stable income? So we're seeing a lot of really large fluctuations from year to year, and then the stability of the income is not being addressed, and that additional documentation is not being sort of reviewed as part of the process. So here's another area where a second level review of somebody with a little more experience may be beneficial for you. If you do see a large fluctuation, just because there's a variation in the income doesn't mean the loan's ineligible. It just means you may have to do a more historical analysis or obtain maybe more recent documentation to support the stability of the income that you're using. So that's a lot of what we're seeing in the self-employed space right now. And again, it's not all related to COVID in 2020 and the changes. We're seeing it. We're still continuing to see it today, even with 2022 tax returns and people who survived through COVID and businesses that thrived and did well. We're still seeing some of these large fluctuations. And so what I always encourage you, make sure you address everything that's in the file. Everything in the file, we have a section of our guide, 3401.1. It does indicate that any documentation required or any documentation in the file, even if not required by the AUS, will be at least assessed. You have to take a look at it. And if you see a stability issue, raise your hand and ask somebody to take a look at it. Ask somebody, one of your coworkers or your manager. But if you can build that into your process, I think that you'll have even more success in getting the right loans over to us.
Yeah. I think that's super important, Steve. And one of the things that we see in the seller engagement side is lenders really using technology to help in the self-employment space. So there's something new that we rolled out in the AIM space for Schedule C income with Halcyon to take a look at tax transcript income. But something we've had on the market for some time is looking at AIM for income on all tax returns. So S corps, partnerships, Schedule C, any type of self-employed income that comes through in those forms. And that works through LoanLogix, LoanCrafts, and CoreLogic. And what we do find is lenders that take advantage and use this technology, particularly for these complicated self-employment returns, find that they have some greater consistency in their process. It will certainly alert them to when there's missing pages or when things are out of alignment. And I do see these sellers that not just use this in underwriting, but they really take it and pull it kind of back all the way through the loan officer. And they have the loan officers and the processors really doing the work up front on that self-employment income. And while that certainly doesn't mean that you wouldn't have a senior level underwriter look for it, it means that they've already taken a first pass through and they've made sure that what they're sending over is complete and accurate. And I think that just makes a huge difference for consistency and to leverage technology in this space, because these returns are hard, they are complicated, there's a lot of pages, and just using a little technology to create a lift there can make a huge difference. And then lastly, not to be a broken record, but yes, back to those LPA feedback messages again, they will provide you with rep and warrant relief, but they'll also tell you for those self-employed returns where we see potential issues that you should dive a little deeper. I think that's it for self-employed. Let's head to rental. Back to you, Steve.
And you, yeah, so you touched on something too about feeding all of that training and these technology things that we have all the way back up to the frontline staff as far as you can. And Freddie Mac has trainings that we have training modules that anyone can take. We had a fairly large lender recently have their entire operations staff take those trainings, not just the underwriters, not just the QC staff. The processors took it, the loan officers took it. And we're seeing really good results from that. You know, their quality is definitely improving, and they're feeling the good results from that. So I always encourage you, any of these trainings or technology uses, get them all the way back up to the frontline staff, because that's really where your total quality mindset and your defect prevention comes from. If you start right at the front, you don't want to just wait till the very back end and find it. So as we move on to rental income, again, this is another area we see people struggle in, and it's really a couple things to touch on here is I know Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, that we have slight minor variances between how we look at rental income. We just had a recent bulletin come out. Fannie had a recent bulletin come out, and it aligns us a little bit better. But if you can codify those differences in the process and then use your technology to sort of flag loans so that they go to the correct investor and meet that investor's guidelines, I think that's really important. When you're doing rental income, make sure you have a form that you use. One rental income property might be sort of easy, and a seasoned underwriter can do it on a napkin. But when you have multiple rental incomes and you're doing multiple properties and multiple income streams, you really want to have somewhere that you go and document that consistently. And then the auditor, the investor, your own internal quality control process can see how you got to where you're at. And if there's a mistake made, they can try to point it out or identify where that mistake was in that process. And you can go and fix that and improve it. One thing we do still continue to see is when you're using a rent form, when you get down to the bottom, you get the net rental income, it's a loss or it's added income. Don't forget to subtract your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, your monthly payment from that net calculation, so from the calculation, so you know your total net rent income or loss. That's one step that sometimes just gets left out of those forms. And again, make sure you're looking at our guide. So new rental income has specific eligibility requirements. It has rules for when you can and can't do more than offset the payment, when you can and can't use the rental income that's in addition to the principal and interest, and also certain requirements. So Form 1000 and rent deposits, those are sometimes required depending on the situation. So I really encourage you to know the guide and check the eligibility requirements. Every time you go into a loan, just pull it up and make sure you met them all. And again, part of our process is we're giving feedback to the policy team to see where they can make improvements in the guide. And hopefully over the next year, you're going to see a lot of places we found that we can clarify and make things easier for you make things a little clearer, and hopefully that'll help your process. So that's all from the QC side. How about you, Jody?
Sure. So there is a little bit of technology out there to help. It's not something that's widely used, I think, but AIM for income with that tax return offering. So the same thing we talked about with self-employed, that will actually look at rental income as well. The trick with that is to make sure that the address you put in your loan application matches the address that's listed on the tax return for those properties. So again, back to getting the quality all the way up to the front, making sure the loan officer and processor get that information right. AIM will actually pick that up. It won't give you rep and warrant, but it will help you with the math. I think, Steve, this is a complicated topic, and it is one hard to get right, but I will also kind of refer back to your previous comment about our training team. I know they do some spectacular work in this area, and those would be some great classes for everyone to take.
And just, we're continuing from QC perspective, working with them to ask them to do additional training on areas that we see high defects in.
And that kind of brings it back full circle, right, to the total quality mindset. So we see things, we
Absolutely
hear things from our sellers, and we pass that on to our client and training groups to get the word out and make sure that the whole industry hears it. So that's been working quite well, I think, this year.
I think we got one more topic. All right, missing documentation. Yep. So we'll share from the QC perspective. Quality Control Advisor is one of the areas that you submit files through. So there's a couple different ways you can submit files. We really encourage the use of Quality Control Advisor to submit files. We, at the QC Council and some other areas, this is where we listened. We heard that the file size limitations were having to downgrade file quality or remove documentation in order to meet these limits. So we are currently piloting and pursuing increasing those file size limits. So stay tuned. We're hoping that by increasing the limit of the file size you can deliver, we eliminate the need for you to reduce documentations or reduce quality size. And if we have that documentation, then we don't need to request a missing doc. So we definitely listen to you there. We will say the use of checklists. When we see lenders who are using checklists to make sure that they have got every document they need for all the conditions and meeting our requirements, has been very helpful, along with preset bundles for your investors. So if you know what your investor needs and you can create a bundle and map it to their stacking order, that makes it much easier for that investor to review. So Freddie Mac does publish online our what we call our stacking order and how we like to see files in pages and in what order. So if you can get that mapped in, that's a great way to use technology to your advantage. And we always say, look to technology for easy wins. If you find simple, repetitive tasks within your process that are being done manually, is there technology solutions out there that can solve those? Because then you can take those people and put their skill sets to use somewhere else on some maybe more complex or complicated things that require sort of a human eye. So a lot of good things you can do within missing documents. And I always say that the Quality Control Advisor, there is a tab within that shows you your top 10 missing documents, and you can drill down on that detail. So go and review those periodically. And if you see something like the note or the flood cert or something popping up frequently, that can be a quick win where you can go back, look at your bundle, look at your mapping, look at your stacking, and make sure that we're not sort of wasting our time back and forth on documents that should be in the file. So all that stuff can help you on missing docs. Those are just some easy, quick wins there. And we have the information in our Quality Control Advisor readily available for you. And then again, you can reach out to your Freddie Mac rep if you're having any struggles or you need any help there. So that's all I got.
All right, I'll add a couple more things to that, Steve. So back to that first thing you said about the file size, there is some things that I think we see sellers do on that side. So one is making sure that you're not sending all versions of the document. So if you have both signed tax returns and unsigned tax returns, just send the signed tax returns, for example. That'll save you some space. And if you do have to break up your file, just make sure you keep all those pages together. So don't put 2 pages of the bank statement in one package that you send and then the rest of them in another one. So just don't split your pages across multiple packages. I think, Steve, you covered a lot on the tech side about things that they can do in their imaging system and things that QCA can help them identify common problems with missing docs. But I will say, as much as you can do on technology, it still does matter who you do that work. We did have one lender had outsourced that function, and they just recognized that the people that were sending the files over really just weren't well versed in what they were sending. And even though they were following a checklist, they didn't have any context for what they were doing. And that really does make a difference. So it might seem like a simple task, but it really can matter. So, so I think that's it for tips on missing documents. Time for a couple other things toward the end here. Let's see, Steve, why don't you take us on a little more deeper dive into QCA? You mentioned that earlier.
Sure. Looks like we got a couple minutes left. So as we call it internally, QCA, the Quality Control Advisor. And if you do flip to the next slide, you will see sort of the landing screen when you go into Quality Control Advisor. You'll see sort of 4 areas you can dig into: loan file request, remedy, management reporting, and then we have a miscellaneous function. And this is our system that we developed so that you can follow your files that you've sold to Freddie Mac that have been sampled in QC. You can follow them through the entire process, from the moment we sample them all the way through when we close them out, we accept them, any findings associated with it, if remedy does happen to be issued, you can follow the remedy process all the way through. And then we've developed some management reporting that you can do that will help supplement your own internal QC process. So you can just add to it. I do want to make a quick note before we go to the next slide that Quality Control Advisor is usually a day behind. So if you do something today and you're clicking and clicking and clicking and looking for it in Quality Control Advisor, it will typically not be updated until the following day. But if you do jump to the next slide, it'll just show you a little more in depth. This is where we would spend most of our time is in the management reporting. So you'll see the chevrons across the top. You can start with sample and loan delivery. You can do review results, which will show you all of the results that you have from the reviews that have been completed by QC. You can split this by any time frame that you want. You can do as a drop down where it says select type. You can do different sample types that we have. You can look at all of your deficiency results and see some trending and some history, as well as your missing docs. You can take a look at appeals. There's even a small peer comparison of some fields, not all fields, but there are some fields. And I will touch on this before we end, that the PLNAQ tab that is shown here has been deactivated. And this quarter, we plan to come out in our ecosystem with a different way to view your what we call your performing loan not acceptable quality, so your defect rate. You will be able to see that in a more real-time fashion with all of the loan level details behind it. I think everyone will be very happy with that improvement to our technology to help you manage your quality. So that's all I got there. But Jody, I think we got a couple minutes. If you want to touch on some of the LPA messages and how they can help lenders with their loan quality.
For sure. Yeah, these are all in your handouts, so you can take a look at those. We talked about preventing unnecessary documentation. This is just a good little cheat sheet to think about messages that LPA sends back so you don't collect unnecessary income or asset documentation, and also tells you just which messages to focus on. So just a good reminder there. The next slide is another list about spotting potential calculation defects. So I mentioned that AIM might not give you rep and warrant relief, but it will fire messages around income that's fluctuating or reasonable or insufficient or doesn't have enough history. So keep an eye out for those messages, both for wage earners and self-employed. And then lastly, just because you get a digital report around income doesn't mean that the report has accurate information or might have stale information. And these are just some key messages to look for on that front. So take a look at those and then just think about how to incorporate those into your process or your checklists or things that you ask your underwriters to look for. And I think last we have some resources. So let's take a look at that. Steve, I think we talked a lot about the training team and the great job that they do. There's some webinars out there. There's some Let's QC webinars that you had been leading. Those are great resources as well. And then there's a few direct links here to help with fluctuating income.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So we are just about out of time. I really wanted to thank everyone for attending today's Total Quality Mindset session. We really appreciated your time today. And if you do have any questions, please reach out to your Freddie Mac representative. With that, I will pass it back to Camden.
Thank you, Jody and Steve, for your great presentation and your insights today. For our audience members, your opinion is really important to us. Please take a few moments to complete our brief survey so that we can continue to bring you timely and relevant content. This presentation deck will be sent to you following this session. You can also log in anytime after the conference to play back this or any other session. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the conference.